Hello again, Steve here with a few comments on how society decides who should vote and who should be responsible for this and that or not responsible for this and that. And because I was thinking as I was driving here with my bacon box in the back about this in terms of, because there's a lot of conversation out there I find sometimes in certain circles as to whether women should vote, or is it possible that we can have a society that's not socialist with women voting and all this sort of thing. And I thought I should just give some thinking about this as I was driving. And what I realized is that society is sort of generally, in democracies anyways, or in social decision making, historically, it looks like kind of an arbitrary, but not completely arbitrary decision as to who was involved. And I'll stretch this out a little bit by just making the comment that I was listening to a podcast not long ago. And this guy was talking about how when he grew up in Ireland, he had this aunt of his who used to take him for walks and what have you. And this guy was a very curious kid. And he asked his aunt one time, he says, well, how did the ancient Irish figure out how to catch the fish and what plants to eat in the shrubbery and whatnot? And the old aunt's reply was, something like, oh, lots of trial and error, me lad. And, and there's something to be said for that, because they didn't have a scientific methodology, perhaps, as we would know it today. And so just to look at this for a minute, when I was thinking about women voting or whatever, and why there was the prohibitions against them and so on, I was looking at, okay, in society, there's quite a mix of people, right? All the way from newborn babies to very, very old people, men and women and what have you. And then making a decision in a community, to who makes the decisions, making a decision on that rather. What society would give a toddler that responsibility? A toddler is given the protection of society, or should be, but is not given the responsibility of society. Now, where in that transition from babyhood to adulthood is that decision made that now you're responsible? Well, the way society has to work is because if there's laws written and stuff like this, there can't be this whole cadre. Well, there could be, I suppose, but it'd be very, very complicated to have this whole cadre of testing going on to see if somebody is astute, and then that could be corrupted and what have you. No, what happens is that there's a decision at a certain point to say, okay, at this point onward, you are something. You're a different category. You're an adult. And you see within different jurisdictions, there some are like it's 21. Some, in ancient times it was 30 something. Sometimes it's if you're a certain property owner. Sometimes it's that you are 18, 16, and so on for different categories of things. But all of those are in a way arbitrary, because if you can have one jurisdiction here versus the next one and there's 2 years in difference, obviously it's nothing based on fact. It's an arbitrary decision, but it's approximately around the same age, right? And this could be considered very unfair. Like, so the 16-year-old who's very responsible, very civically knowledgeable, could say, oh, this is unfair. I don't get to participate. Meanwhile, some knucklehead down the road who's 25, who doesn't know anything, he does get to participate. And that can, so you're always going to have these outliers. So if you look at women, people think it's just bigotry that women didn't vote. Well, if the 16-year-old was to make the case that everybody's just a bigot against 16-year-olds because I'm not allowed to vote, if they put on their thinking cap, they realize, no, that's not true, because there has to be, if that system is going to exist, which I'm not saying I agree with it, but if that system's going to exist, there has to be a point at which that takes place, because obviously the 16-year-old is going to agree that the toddler is not capable, and then it wouldn't make sense to leave it to 65 either, would it? So somewhere in between so there has to be this case made. And with women not being allowed to vote, well, historically, we recognized a reality, which is that men and women are different, right? And what they noticed through trial and error is that women, by and large, were not civically knowledgeable. They were taking care of the babies and so on. The most important, you could argue, the most important aspect of society was to give birth and rear children to continue society. They were busy doing that. Men were out on the frontiers of the terrain and so on, hunting and talking with each other and trying to organize the macro side of it, whereas the women were looking at the micro. So men recognized, and women recognized, that we don't know about the grander organization of the defenses of the frontiers and what have you. So why should we be making decisions on that? And also, why would men be making decisions on when the baby is to be breastfed? It made no sense. So it was role categorization, right? And so a woman back in the day before there was voting could gloat over, oh, I'm not allowed to vote, just like the 16-year-old could gloat over why I'm not allowed to vote. But when they put their thinking caps on, they'll realize, oh, it's because this was the result of trial and error. And what the recognition was is that most women were not qualified based on what society saw as important. Just like most 16-year-olds are not qualified based on what society sees as important. And I think that's what it comes down to. It wasn't bigotry completely, although in some cases it could be, and in some cases it could be perceived as that for teenagers as well. But that doesn't explain the whole thing. And of course now we're seeing the results of it. We see that the more and more people who are opened up to the franchise, the more corrupted the society becomes. So maybe the trial and error was correct. I mean, I had a brother who was mentally retarded. He was encouraged to vote. At one time that was deemed to be inappropriate. And you know, we've noticed that through observation and studies that about 25 years after women are given the franchise, every jurisdiction turns socialist. And you know, socialism, we know now quite clearly, is a cancer, a societal cancer, which eventually kills its host. So we'll have to go back to the trial and error methodology, perhaps, which, or we'll look at things more socially, or hopefully we just get to a anarcho-capitalist society eventually, little by little, because we want freedom, basically, right, is what we want. And we want everybody to have maximum freedom, men, women, children, the whole works, and be healthy. That's what we want. We want a holy society, which is a healthy society, and that means we have healthy and holy individuals in healthy, wholesome relationships with others, I would say. Steve here, again, great chatting. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share, and we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.